All right, today we are jumping into the absolutely fascinating life of one of Islam's most influential thinkers, Al-Ghazali. People called him Hujjat al-Islam, which means the proof of Islam. And his story, well, it's this incredible drama of huge success, a devastating personal crisis, and then a mission to literally rebuild faith from the inside out. Seriously, just think about that for a second. Imagine you're at the absolute top of your game. You're famous, you're respected, you have it all, and then you just walk away. That is exactly what Al-Ghazali did. So this isn't just a history lesson. It's a story of a brilliant mind hitting a wall, a crisis of certainty that would end up changing Islamic thought forever.
Now, to really get Al-Ghazali, we first have to get the world he was born into. The 11th century was not a quiet, reflective time. It was a pressure cooker of clashing ideas and political turmoil, and he was right in the thick of it.
So that title, Proof of Islam, he earned it. The best way to think of him is as an architect. His old project was to take these battling schools of thought, you've got philosophy, theology, law, and this deep mysticism, and somehow construct one solid, coherent building of faith that could stand up to any storm.
And believe me, it was a storm. The Islamic world back then was this vibrant, chaotic battlefield of ideas. So before Al-Ghazali could even start building, he had to master every single one of these competing ideologies. He had to know them inside and out. Okay, so first up, you had falsafa, which is philosophy. Thinkers like the famous Ibn Sina, or Avicenna in the West, were building these amazing logical systems based on Greek thinkers like Aristotle. The problem was, some of their conclusions, like the idea that the universe has always existed and wasn't created, were on a direct collision course with core religious beliefs. To push back against that, you had Kalam, or what we'd call scholastic theology. This was the intellectual defense force of the faith, using super-rational arguments to defend Islamic doctrine and prove God's total power. It was brilliant for sure, but a lot of people, and eventually Al-Ghazali himself, felt it was spiritually empty. All head and no heart.
And then you have Sufism. This was the total opposite. It wasn't about intellectual proof. It was about purifying your heart to have a direct, personal experience of God. They had this key idea called dak, which literally means tasting. The idea was you could taste divine truth, not just reason your way to it. It was incredibly popular, but you can imagine all the ecstatic practices made some of the strict legal scholars pretty nervous.
And finally, the bedrock holding society together was fiqh, or Islamic law. This was the rulebook for daily life, the structure for the whole community. And this was Al-Ghazali's home turf. He wasn't just good at it, he was an undisputed master of the law, the heart of the establishment.
So Al-Ghazali masters everything. He climbs the ladder faster than anyone, becomes the most famous, most brilliant scholar of his generation, and then, right at the peak, at the absolute summit of his success, the whole thing just comes crashing down.
I mean, just look at this. At only 33 years old, he lands the most prestigious academic job in the entire Islamic world, in Baghdad. 4 years later, he's hit by what he calls a skeptical disease. He's spiritually paralyzed. He literally can't get words out to teach. So he gives it all up, the fame, the money, the prestige, and just disappears for 11 years, wandering as a poor Sufi, looking for an answer. He only comes back when he's sure he's found it.
This quote from his autobiography really gets to the heart of it. For 6 whole months, he was completely stuck, crippled by doubt. He came to realize that all his learning, all his logic, all his books, it wasn't enough. For him, true, unshakable knowledge couldn't be reasoned into existence. It had to be a direct gift, what he beautifully called a light God casts directly into the heart.
So after this decade-long journey, Al-Ghazali comes back with a plan. He sets out to fix the very crisis that broke him, and he does it in 2 parts. First, you tear down the old, flawed structures, and then you can build something new and solid. This plan resulted in his 2 greatest works.
First came the demolition phase. In his incredible book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, he did something brilliant. He didn't just attack reason. He used the philosophers' own logical tools to pick apart their arguments, showing that their big claims about the nature of reality weren't built on absolute proof. He basically said, just because something seems logical doesn't make it true. And crucially, he singled out 3 of their ideas, like the world being eternal, and declared them not just wrong, but completely beyond the pale of Islamic belief.
Then, after clearing the ground, he started building. And this was his true masterpiece, the revival of the religious sciences. It's this massive, comprehensive roadmap for the entire spiritual life. He brings everything together:
law, ethics, and mysticism. He shows how the outer rituals of faith are meant to shape your inner character, and he gives you a manual for diagnosing and curing the diseases of the heart. This was a game changer. He effectively made the mystical path of Sufism not just safe, but an essential part of mainstream Orthodox Islam.
So what's his legacy? What was the final impact of all this? Well, like with any thinker this big, it's complicated. His legacy is massive, but it's also hotly debated. The big question is, was he a brilliant unifier who saved Islamic tradition? Or was he an interrupter who actually shut down other lines of thought? On the one hand, you have critics like the philosopher Ibn Rushd, Averroes in the West, who argued that Al-Ghazali's takedown of philosophy basically closed the door on scientific and philosophical inquiry in the Islamic world for centuries. But on the other hand, his achievement was monumental. He managed to create this powerful synthesis that so many people were craving. He fused the inner, personal path of Sufism with the outer, legal framework of the faith. He created a balanced middle way that spoke to both the mind and the heart, and that vision has shaped Islam ever since.
And that kind of brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? Al-Ghazali's crisis came from a world with too many brilliant competing ideas, a world that left him feeling paralyzed with doubt. His entire journey was a search for a kind of certainty that logic and books alone couldn't provide. And now, almost 1,000 years later, living in our own age of information overload and constant debate, his story feels more relevant than ever. It leaves us with a really powerful question. Where do we find our certainty?